All right, so we're talking about reform. Reform is going to come in a bunch of different ways, I think, right? And you're right about who we choose to be the next, or who we choose to be the next person to represent us as the Broward Sheriff Office. We had someone that was elected in 2016 that wasn't able to complete their term. We have someone that's in there right now. It's questionable whether or not they would have been allowed to complete their term too, had we not been so close to an election. And we don't know if he's reelected, what would happen with that. So that's a very important point that you make in terms of who we choose to be the next Broward Sheriff person for the Broward Sheriff Office. With that being said, what kind of relationship do you anticipate, or do you expect that the state attorney, the Broward Sheriff's Office, and the public defender's office what would that relationship look like in order for us to start that road to criminal justice reform? Later on, we'll get into more details or nuances of it, but I want to know, how is it that you would establish a relationship with those agencies?
Great question. I love that question, because people fail to realize that as a state attorney, I think it's the most unique position besides, I think, the clerk of the courts, that has hands in every aspect of life in Broward County. I truly believe that if you're going to be the next state attorney, you have to have a working relationship with all the law enforcement agencies, the judiciary, and all the constitutional officers in Broward County. But let me be clear. As a state attorney and under Harold Pryor's administration, we will be an independent agency. We won't work in a sense of trying to cover for law enforcement agencies or the wrongful actions or conduct of law enforcement agencies or officers in their duties and tasks. We have to hold them accountable, and my office will hold them accountable. But there's a caveat to that. We have to work with them to initiate this criminal justice reform while not compromising the safety of our communities. There's a second part to that, while not compromising the safety of our communities. That understands that we have law enforcement, and we're going to have law enforcement for the foreseeable future. And I truly believe that as a state attorney, you have to work with the different agencies. You have to work with the various 17 or 19 agencies on top of the Broward County Sheriff's Office. You have to have a working relationship with those law enforcement agencies. And I truly believe that as state attorney, you should have the phone numbers of every chief and the sheriff in Broward County, and you should have an open dialogue with them, an open door policy, to be able to speak with them about the issues that are going on. For me to be able to hold the sheriff accountable for the misconduct of his or her subordinates. Also, you have to be able to hold them accountable when something's done wrong. There's constant Fourth Amendment violations that are going on in the criminal justice system on a day-to-day. And as state attorney, when I was an assistant state attorney, if I dropped a case because of a Fourth Amendment violation, I made it my business to actually contact that law enforcement officer, take him or her to lunch and say, hey, this is why this case was thrown out, or this is why the motion to dismiss was granted, or this is why I chose to drop the charges, because you violated someone's Fourth Amendment issues. Here's why, and here's why you can't do it. We need to institute policies where we're constantly educating law enforcement officers on their duties. Here's the one baffling thing about this whole situation. We're putting law enforcement officers who've only had probably less than a year, less than 2 years, and maybe I'm being generous with that, with law enforcement training going to the academy. They're dealing with complex Fourth Amendment, complex constitutional issues in a matter of seconds. And they have to make split decisions in a matter of seconds or minutes. It took me 3 years of law school, 4 years of undergrad, and a few years as a prosecutor and a lawyer to really get the Fourth Amendment concepts down and really understand how it works. And so we're putting these people who aren't adequately trained or educated into these serious situations. And I truly believe we have to reform the system and how we educate them.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you a little bit while we're talking, just so we can kind of top it up a little bit too. So with that being said, there's this whole talk about defunding the police and all of these different type of things. Is one of the things that you would be on board is if the requirements to be a police officer was a little bit more? Because right now, I think what you just have to be 19 years old, a citizen or something like that, right? You don't even need a college degree in order for you to be a law enforcement officer. Is that something that you would think that should happen? Should they require that they go to college before they be police officers? Or
I truly believe so. And I know I'm going to piss off a lot of friends who are law enforcement officers. Now, my best friend's a law enforcement officer. We grew up in the same rough neighborhood. We lost 5 or 6 friends from the age of 14 to 25. So he knows it better, just as well as me. And I truly believe, and he got his college education. And he went into law enforcement. I think that should be the norm. Here's the problem. The problem is we have to really have law enforcement officers and prosecutors that reflect the communities that they serve, not just reflect the community they serve, but actually like to be in the communities that they serve, actually live there and touch the people. This concept of defunding the police, I truly believe isn't a radical concept at all. It is what it says. It's defunding. I truly believe that it's a reallocation of funds that have not traditionally been allocated or sent to underserved communities. I truly believe that you could tie different allocations of funds and resources that go to law enforcement agencies to their hiring practices. Hey, local law enforcement agency, if you want X amount of dollars, 70, 80% of your workforce or law enforcement officers should actually live in the communities that they patrol. There's different types of allocations and
Okay,
funding
so
that
I'm
you
gonna
can tie to
stop
that.
you again. I'm gonna stop you
Yeah.
again, right? And this is why I'm gonna stop you again, because a lot of times to get them to live in the communities that they to live in the communities where they patrol is problematic. I teach at a couple of the colleges here, right? And I have a student that's a CJ major, and he has 8 traffic tickets, right? He
Wow.
can get into the academy with 8 traffic tickets.
No, right.
Everything else about him, it would be perfect. He's from the neighborhood, he understands, and he's from one of those communities where that's over police. Every time he turns around, they're pulling him over for one thing or another. His tents were too dark, his music was too loud, or he didn't have the light behind the license plate. Like literally, a lot of pretext stop happen. He ends up with all these citations, and now he can't be part of that community. And so like these, yes, you want law enforcement officers to be representative of the community they serve, but particularly people that come from heavily policed neighborhoods, it's hard to get
That's
out
tough.
of there without some sort of law violation. I mean, it's difficult.
Look, I grew up, I know it. I grew up in a rough neighborhood. I have friends who've been in and out of the system, and they're not bad people. It's because of the over-policing of our communities. That's where I come in as state attorney. As state attorney, you have to have policies where you don't try certain offenses. I think when you get to crimes of poverty, my term is I don't want to, as the next state attorney of Broward County, to criminalize poverty. We know that in the criminal justice system, people of color and poor people have been traditionally placed into this vicious cycle we call the criminal justice system. Why? Normally for low-level offenses, for low-level drug offenses, for possession of drug paraphernalia, for driving while license suspended, for other offenses that they probably shouldn't be arrested for. And what happens? You get into the justice system, you get into that vicious cycle. You have an exorbitant fine placed upon you. You're placed on probation for some reason or another. You violate probation, right? So then you fall into that system. And then for some reason or another, you're caught again because your community is over-policed. And there you go. You're in the criminal justice system. That's why we need progressive state attorneys and prosecutors, not only in Broward County, but throughout the country to kind of shift this cycle. And I think if we combat all of these issues with lessening the over-policing of our minority communities, we don't criminalize poverty, have progressive prosecutors that do that, and also we elect judges who can actually understand the communities that we serve, I think we can stop this vicious cycle, and I think we could have more law enforcement officers from our community, like the example that you gave. But it's going to take a full collaborative effort. It's going to take a prosecutor, a state attorney, to build these relationships with the various institutions and constitution officers to think outside the box and to initiate this criminal justice reform we've been talking about for so many years.
Right.